Next we have completing the square. Just another technique used to solve quadratic equations. Completing the square can be used anytime. All right. Sometimes it's messy. Sometimes it's nice. There's times when zero product property won't work because you can't factor. Okay. So this would be an alternative. There's other advantages of completing the square. All right. What it actually does, it converts a quadratic from standard form into what we call vertex or graphing form. Okay. So it'll take your quadratic that we've been looking at and it'll change it to this form. And the reason why this form is nice is because these two numbers tell us the vertex of the parabola. Here's the steps we're going to do. This shell is important. You're going to see how we use that during the process. So let's take a look at a couple examples. All right. So first we're going to use completing the square to write this in vertex form. We're going to state the vertex and then we're going to solve for the x-intercept. So this is a three-part problem. On a quiz or a test, I would probably break this down into 3 questions. So we have y equals, and I'm going to write the shell, okay? Because this part is always the same. I'm looking for this and this, okay? Now, the next step to get these is I focus on this number right here, and I divide it by 2. So I cut it in half. What's half of 2? Well, half of 2 is 1. Positive stays positive, okay? That's the first step, is to just cut this in half. The next step would be to take that answer that you just got, okay, 1, and you want to square it. What is 1 squared? All right, well, 1 squared equals 1, but I don't want 1. Okay, my original problem says -8. Okay, so I have 1. I need -8. Okay, now here's a time when some people really struggle. Okay, but a lot of you can just get this in your head. If I have the number 1, but I need the number -8, what must I do? Okay, well, the only way to get from 1 to -8 is to subtract 9. So my vertex form would say y equals x plus 1 squared minus 9. From that, I can get my vertex. Okay, now on the previous page there, it said vertex was -h comma k. Okay, well, -h here just means the opposite of this number. So the vertex here is actually -1, -9. So the reason why that negative is there is to clue you in that you have to take the opposite of that. So if I was to graph this parabola, its vertex would be at -1, -9. And then I want to solve for the x-intercepts. That's the last part of the problem. Okay, so here's the first part, write in vertex form. Second part, state the vertex from looking at it. Third part, solve. So I let it equal 0. Okay. So I'm using my normal equation solving strategies here. I'm going to add 9 first. So 9 equals x plus 1 squared. To get rid of a square, we have to square root both sides. Okay, and we got to remember a little trick here. When you square root the number 9, you actually get 2 answers. 3 and -3. Okay, that's where we get our 2 x-intercepts from. So if I finish this, I'm going to get x equals 2. And over here, I'm going to get x equals -4. Okay, so in a few short steps, I was able to find 3 points, okay, on this parabola, which would probably be enough to graph the parabola. If I plotted the vertex and I plotted the 2 x-intercepts, I would have enough information to draw that U-shaped graph. That's what completing the square is. I'm going to try another one. All right, again, can't stress to you enough. The first step is to set up the shell. X squared, I'm looking for this and this. Okay, well, how do I find that? Everybody's got to be able to do this part. What's half of that number? All right, you're always taking half of that number. Half of that number is -2. Okay, step 2, square that answer. Okay, so take your 2 and square it. What is 2 squared? Equals 4. So I have 4. I want -12. So how do you get from 4 to -12? Well, I'm going to have to subtract 16. Okay, so there's my vertex form. Okay, what is my vertex? Well, my vertex is always going to be the opposite of that, which is 2, and that number, which is -16. If I solve this equation, I would find my x-intercepts. So 0 would equal x minus 2 squared minus 16. Add 16. Square root both sides. So I get 4. All right, so remember when I square root the 16, I get a positive 4 and a negative 4. Okay, so that means here I'm going to get an x equals 6 when I add that 2 over. Here I'm going to get x equals negative 2. All right, there's my two answers. So 6 comma 0, negative 2 comma 0, and again, with these 3 points, I should be able to graph that parabola. So lots of advantages to completing the square. All right, and last one here. I want you to go ahead and try this one, okay, and then check back in and see what you. So here's one that gets a little bit messy because I have an odd number here for this middle value, and that can happen. 3 divided by 2, or half of 3, is 1.5. I'm still squaring 1.5. I got 2.25, but I want negative 10, so I had to subtract 12.25 to get that. Okay, now we're not going to go ahead and solve this one. I can state the vertex though, negative 1.5 comma negative 12.25, but you understand you could solve this. You're going to use your calculator, you're going to be getting messy decimals. This one is not one that is advantageous to graph because these are places that are very difficult to plot on a coordinate plane. Okay, so hopefully you have enough there about completing a square and see some advantages, disadvantages of it. Okay, and again, the main advantage of completing the square is it works every time. Okay, it's never impossible to do, whereas zero product property sometimes won't work if we cannot factor the quadratic.